Hi fans, please like our video and subscribe to the RotoWire channel. Then please go to rotowire.com/pod for a free 10-day trial.
Welcome to the latest edition of the RotoWire NBA podcast. Nick Whalen here, as always, with Alex Barutha. Alex, we are, I believe, by my calculation, exactly 3 weeks away from opening night of the NBA season, which we still do not have an actual schedule for the NBA season. The league will be releasing the schedule in two parts. Again, the season starts in 3 weeks. We do not know even who is playing on opening night at this point, but I think we have a pretty good idea based on where the certain stars reside and how these games tend to work. But the news is starting to trickle in as some teams, did a kind of soft opening of training camp on Tuesday, essentially a remote media day. Where we got updates on guys like Will Barton and Marvin Bagley, guys who you just haven't heard from at all since they were dealing with injuries months ago. So it was good to check in on some of that, and the news, of course, will continue to flow in over these next 3 weeks. But I thought personally the biggest news of the day, Terry Stotts just came out and said it. Carmelo Anthony is going to come off the bench behind Derrick Jones Jr. of all people to begin the season in Portland.
That's a bold move. I was surprised when it ended up being Derrick Jones, although it seems like Zach Collins isn't going to be ready for a while.
Yeah.
So maybe this is kind of like a Derrick Jones placeholder until Zach Collins is back, just so they don't have to eventually yank the starting job from Carmelo.
I think so too. I think it's kind of hey, we're giving you 3 weeks to mentally prepare for this. Because most coaches I think would say, we'll see how they look out there. We'll take the decision down to the wire. Like this was a firm, look, man, it might be over. We're gonna need you to take some time to accept this decision. But it's surprising. I mean, I said to you off air, I thought this was such a big deal, at least last year and certainly the year before, to Melo to be in the starting lineup, and everything kind of broke right for him to do so for most of the year in Portland. I feel like there were other places where he maybe could have signed and had a better chance to start, like Charlotte, for example. There are a few teams that have these kind of massive holes on the wing, and Melo conceivably could have filled them. But I mean, we're half joking, obviously, but Melo's going to be a relatively important depth piece for a Blazers team that made a really nice trade in getting Robert Covington. I like the addition of Derrick Jones, who it feels like in Miami has always been like one guy away from being in the rotation. Just when you think it's going to happen, they trade for Iguodala or they get Jay Crowder, and it just never really worked out for him. But I mean, for a guy who can give you 15 to 20 minutes, I think the Portland bench is still shaky, but at least a little bit improved.
Yeah, and I think this makes sense too, because in the starting lineup, you already have Lillard, McCollum, Nurkic, who are going to do most of the scoring. I mean, those guys could combine for 60 a night, right?
Right.
So I think
then Melo's 30. All of a sudden, you're at 90.
I think Coach Stotts just wanted more defense, right? You have Covington and Derrick Jones on the wing. That does a lot. And then off your bench, I guess you have Melo, Rodney Hood, Angus Cantor, and a very interesting bench, but one that can definitely put points up at least.
No, for sure. Do you want to continue and just do 55 minutes of Blazers talk or get into some other news?
Anthony Simons, maybe this is the year.
All right, I'm cutting it off right there. Absolutely not. Andrew Bogut retired. This was on Monday. I believe he announced it on the Rogue Bogues podcast hosted by Andrew Bogut. But that news circulated, of course, very quickly. Number 1 overall pick in 2005, NBA champion with the Warriors in 2015, their first title of that era. Kind of a strange career. One of those guys who went number 1 overall, doesn't necessarily have the resume of the guy you would hope to take at number 1, but at the same time, he made a third-team All-NBA. May have had a good chance to make another All-NBA team, or at least be an All-Star, had he not had that gruesome elbow injury that kind of ended up changing the course of his career and turning him into. It happened a little bit later on, and he was an older prospect coming in, but it never really felt like he returned to being the versatile kind of athletic type of player that he was, at least for his body style after that injury. But all in all, I mean, a successful career. Again, not the, should the Bucks have taken Chris Paul over Andrew Bogut with the number 1 pick in 2005? Some people would say that they should. But all in all, a pretty strong career for Andrew Bogut in what was a pretty strange draft looking back at that one.
Yeah, as a Bucks fan, I enjoyed like watching him. He was fun to watch, right? He was,
Mhm.
I mean, in a pretty rough era, he was almost an all-star some of those years. Like the only thing that was really stopping him was basically Dwight Howard being there. But
I think Jamal McGlure made an All-Star team one of those years, so let's not be too kind.
well, the Bucks also had Jamal McGlure at one point.
They sure did.
But yeah, Bogut, like in his prime, basically 15 and 11 with 2.5 blocks, 51% shooting. Like he was good. And like you mentioned, a great kind of career turnaround. Like there's not always a ton of stories of guys like having a severe injury and then accepting like a role of like 20 minutes or 15 minutes and just kind of being a shell of themselves. And he changed his game a ton, right? He became mostly a distributor, and only scored on like lob touches around the basket. So, a really interesting career. And I think you're right in calling it successful ultimately.
Where does Andrew Bogut go now? If that version of Andrew Bogut coming out of Utah is in the 2020 NBA draft, like is he even a first round pick?
I think someone would probably use a late first on him because they would see like, he has potential for, I mean, he led the league in blocks, right? And if you saw that potential, those guys will go in the first round if a team
Right.
thinks there's a center who can lead the league in blocks. Um, you know, so I think he would have gone first round.
So if you look at that 05 draft class, Bogut is 8th in career win shares, and he is 7th in career VORP. So the guys ahead of him are Chris Paul, Darren Williams, Lou Williams, David Lee, Danny Granger. Not a bad pick. I mean, not a great draft, given, but if you're not going to take Chris Paul or Darren Williams, like there's not like this massive gap between Lou Williams and Andrew Bogut. The careers that they've had overall.
Right. And if Bogut would have stayed healthy, then it would be a lot closer than that. Like he probably would end up. I mean, I don't have the numbers. I don't know. I can't tell you. I can't calculate VORP in my head. But if he he could have had a better career. Could have could have had a better career than Lou Williams, maybe. I mean, if you talk about potential playoffs, stuff like that, like I don't know.
I cannot wait to write up the description for this podcast. Like, who would you rather have, Lou Williams or Andrew Bogut?
Or the
better
healthy
career.
Andrew Bogut.
In other news, Victor Oladipo today denied wanting to leave the Indiana Pacers. Put up a pretty vehement denial, almost comically, I thought, because this was one of those situations where like he like didn't say anything for so long that it was, in my opinion, pretty obvious that there was at least some level of discontent, and he just seemed baffled. He couldn't believe that people thought he wanted out of Indiana. But I thought more importantly, he said he feels way better than he did. He said night and day compared to the end of the bubble, which end of the first round of the playoffs for the Pacers wasn't that long ago. That's pretty encouraging, for fantasy players. Pretty encouraging if you're a Pacers fan. I think they're going to be one of the more difficult teams to evaluate because I think we went into the offseason thinking like, all right, Miles Turner, he might be gone. Victor Oladipo, he's almost certainly gone. You got Jeremy Lamb coming off of the knee injury that ended his season. TJ Warren, who knows what to expect. All those guys are now back, and they're kind of running it back with the team that was underratedly pretty solid. And if Victor Oladipo can be, 85% of what he was, when he was an All NBA player a few years ago. I know we've said that each of the last 2 years, but if it does happen, I think Indiana could certainly be in the mix for not only a playoff spot, but I mean maybe a second round bid if it comes to that.
Well, I think so because I think Boston got worse and I think Toronto got worse, and Miami basically stayed the same. Philly basically stayed the same. So yeah, I mean Indiana could be. I don't want to say they'll end up being like a 2 or a 3 seed, but considering most teams around them got worse, or most teams above them got worse, they could make some noise. Yeah, if Oladipo is his former self, and they just make things click. Like Brogdon also missed a ton of time last year too. Turner needs to take like a step forward, I think, also, but he might not have to if Oladipo plays well. But yeah, they're in a good spot. They basically did nothing this offseason, but that's okay.
Right. And I mean, last year they got 19 games out of Oladipo, and he was terrible for like 15 of those. Like you said, Brogdon missed time, and chances are that happens again. Turner has kind of been the same player since he came into the league, hasn't really improved. Other than Sabonis taking a big step forward and TJ Warren having that like godlike 3 weeks, it wasn't like everything broke right for them, and they finished with a better regular season record than both Miami and Philadelphia. And part of that was Philly, kind of imploding and Miami, clearly, maybe not putting its foot on the gas during the regular season, but still, I mean, like you said, like the Oladipo being Oladipo would be massive for them because it's not like they really need that to happen to just be a decent above average team.
Right, because Sabonis made an all-star game. Brogdon was a fringe all-star. Obviously, Oladipo's an all-star when he's healthy. And if you're in the East and you have three basically borderline all-stars, you're in as good of a spot as almost any other team in the conference.
Right. So you mentioned the Celtics got worse. And I think on paper, you're right. We'll see what they do with, I believe Bobby Marks said it might be the largest trade exception ever created because it's the value of, I think, Hayward's salary last year, which was like north of 30 million, right? So you have this massive trade exception that you could absorb a player into. So that was huge for Boston, turning that into a sign and trade. It took over a week for all the machinations to come to fruition there, but they get the trade exception. I think right away they're worse for sure because you're basically just pulling Gordon Hayward off of that roster and not replacing him with anything. But they do now have some flexibility as far as, absorbing someone, whether it's, later this season, whether it's next offseason. I think that you basically have like a full calendar year to use that trade exception. And I would expect Boston to be pretty aggressive in pursuing someone to fill that. I think the bigger concern in the short term is, the Jeff Teague addition was nice. You lose Brad Wanamaker. Tristan Thompson, okay, adding some depth at center. They didn't really beef up the bench, I think, to the level that Celtics fans would have hoped. And then, now we learned that Kemba Walker won't be on the court until, probably mid-January at the earliest. Teams are always pretty conservative with this, but for Brad Stevens to come out and say, like, yeah, he's not even going to be doing on-court work until the first week of January, which is a week, at that point, you're over 2 weeks into the regular season. If he's just starting his on-court work on, say, January 7th, it might not be till the end of January when Kemba Walker's actually on the floor. So, I think, Celtics fans, your biggest fear was all these knee injuries or these knee issues, I should say, for Kemba last year, kind of creeping into, not only this season, but maybe going forward on this max contract. And I mean, this is kind of worst case scenario so far.
Yeah. I mean, I'm based on the wording and based on what we know about how teams handle this kind of a thing. I am expecting Kemba Walker to miss like a full month pretty much, which at a shortened schedule could be 14 games or something like that.
Right.
And yeah, their backup, I mean, if Jeff Teague is starting, then their backup point guard is either Marcus Smart, Peyton Pritchard, Carson Edwards. That's not great. Aaron Nesmith's going to play real minutes. Tyson Thompson, that's fine, but it's still one of the worst like center rotations in the league for a team, at least for a playoff team. The depth is rough. And I think I understand why they let Hayward go. They didn't want to pay him at that number, but he's a really versatile player who could play like three positions, and losing that definitely hurts in the short term. And I'm sure they'll figure it out, but I think the Celtics will be looking towards the playoffs this year. Like, they'll definitely be in the playoffs, but I think their regular season I don't think it's going to be great, would be my guess.
Yeah, I mean, they have such a high floor just because
Yeah.
Jason Tatum is turning into one of the best players in the league, and Jaylen Brown, I think, we'll talk about most improved player odds later, but, James and I talked last week about him being a great candidate for that. The pieces are in place, but I think you made a good point where, on paper, like the top 7 or 8 guys are fine. I thought Thompson was a little bit redundant because you have Robert Williams, you kept Tice. To add another guy into that mix, I'm not sure that really solves any of the problems that you had last year, but the depth is fine. The problem is when you lose one of those guys, all of a sudden you start scrambling. And when it's your starting point guard, you said, oh, you have Marcus Smart to back him up. Well, Marcus Smart is starting at shooting guard. So if Marcus Smart's going to play point guard, then who's playing shooting guard? And all of a sudden, like, it's great to have Jeff Teague. Like, he's probably overqualified to be a backup point guard. If he's starting, that's fine. But, at this point, he's also probably a little underqualified to be a starter on a really good playoff team. So, like you said, once you get beyond Teague, the depth is pretty scary. I mean, I think there's a lot to like with someone like Peyton Pritchard, but, he's just your consummate college point guard and probably not a guy that you want to have to play 20, 25 minutes a night as a rookie, in his first NBA season. So there's going to be some issues, I think, early on for Boston, but at the end of the day, as you mentioned, I mean, they're a team that's firmly in playoff mode. And I think as an overarching theme of this season, we're going to see more teams play it out that way. Kind of be willing to, lose a seed or two along the way, be willing to, drop 3 games in a row, and prioritize rest. Because some of these teams, I think the Lakers will be in that boat. I think the Clippers, Boston, I could see Miami doing that. I think these teams, especially if fans aren't going to be in the arenas, I think as we saw in the bubble, there's just not going to be that much of an advantage, to having the 3 seed versus the 6 seed. And I think we're going to see a really increased priority on making sure you're as healthy and fresh as possible for the playoffs.
Yeah, I think so. Well, I mean, I guess we'll see, how well these, late first and second round picks are going to turn out for Boston. Like Brad Stevens has kind of been like toying with playing Semi Ojeleye more, especially against like Giannis and those kinds of matchups. Grant Williams is someone who I liked last year, didn't see a ton of playing time as a rookie. We're just these guys are basically going to get thrown into the fire. And if they play well, that's great. But I don't think we should expect it.
So I mentioned at the top that we got some good news on Marvin Bagley. He's going to be ready to go. We'll see what that equates to. I think he played, 19 games, 15 games last year. It feels like forever since we've actually seen him play. We thought we were going to see him in the bubble, and then he immediately gets hurt when practice starts there. There's a pretty great quote from Luke Walton. Not even the quote itself, but just like the context, where he was asked straight up, like, is Buddy Hield going to start at shooting guard? Like the obvious starter at shooting guard. And he just gave the typical, like, well, we'll see. We got some options. We like our options. I don't know. If it's not Buddy Hield, who's it going to be? I mean, is it going to be Tyrese Halliburton? Do they throw him in right away? Because if it's not one of those two guys, then you're looking at Corey Joseph or Kyle Guy, basically G Leaguers. It was just bizarre. I mean, not that you have to fully commit to a starting 5 on the first day of camp, but there's just not, Bogdanovich is gone. There's just not really another clear option.
No, I mean, this was, again, for me, like another signal that, like, they let Bogdanovich walk. Luke Walton doesn't like Buddy Hield that much. They must really love Halliburton, right? Like, as a franchise. Like, I know he slipped to them, and everyone has amazing things to say about Halliburton. He's versatile, but, like, they must really like him.
I mean, I agree, but at the same time, I if you really liked him that much, like, I'm surprised they wouldn't have traded up to 7 or 8 or 9 or whatever to get him. Like, we're still yet to get like a great explanation for why he slid. Somebody who is, conceivably such a safe prospect. It was great for them to land Halliburton, but I can't imagine that they went into draft night thinking they were going to get him.
Probably not. Yeah, I mean, if Hield doesn't start, then I don't know. I mean, every team in the league would like try to trade for Buddy Hield, right? Like, he is the perfect, like, just gunner from 3, someone who's like more versatile than, like Joe Harris or Bertans or something like that. Like, someone who could be your number 4 kind of on a team, or maybe a number 3 if your first 2 are great. So, I mean, I hope he just gets into a situation where he can just play 30 minutes a game, right? Because it doesn't. Right. I know he's not great at defense, but you got to find close to 30 minutes a game for him. He's in his prime right now.
I'm almost glad that this situation is disintegrating because I want to see him somewhere else. I think he's kind of going to waste in Sacramento. I mean, I don't think they're a team that's going to push for the playoffs this year, although they did just add Hassan Whiteside. So we'll see what that means. But I would like to see him in like an overqualified 6-man role. I don't want him to be the 6th man on a team that he should be starting for, but I would like to see him be, either like the 4th or 5th option on a really good team, or the 6th man for like the Lakers or a team like the Celtics, whoever it might be. I think he would be. He has a chance to be like the biggest addition at the trade deadline, whenever that will be.
Yeah, like if he was at shooting guard for the Nuggets instead of Gary Harris, or if he was in the Luke Kennard spot for the Clippers.
Oh yeah.
Or something like that. Like, that would be great.
Right, and it's a situation where, at least on the outside, it doesn't seem like he wants to be there. It doesn't really seem like they want him there. So you're not going to have to pay this exorbitant price, you would think, to get your hands on him.
You wouldn't think so, but I still think every team in the league is going to try to bid for him. So I think the cost will still be relatively high.
Okay, so we're going to go off script here for a second because I just saw this across Twitter. Sam Amico has a note that the Warriors reached out to the Rockets about James Harden. What would that deal look like?
You think they would give up Wiseman and like Wiggins.
I think it has to be Wiseman. I think that's the starting point. I think
Wiseman,
Wiggins has to be included for salary,
yeah.
or maybe Oubre, but I would assume Wiggins.
Wiseman, Wiggins. I don't know if you'd put Oubre in it. I get like you'd probably have to, right? Like if you were the Rockets, you wouldn't trade Harden for Wiseman and Wiggins straight up.
God,
you'd probably you'd want picks. You'd want Oubre probably. The Warriors just like don't have a lot, and
they really don't.
Yeah,
but what they do have is the Minnesota pick next year.
Oh, I forgot about that.
I think that is the trump card in this. And could it trump other offers from other teams that have more physical pieces? Maybe not. But I think that's what you have to be putting on the table if you're trying to get someone the caliber of James Harden. I'm not sure I want to see James Harden play with Steph Curry. For the record, I mean we've seen him now play with Chris Paul and Russell Westbrook. It wasn't a whole lot of fun. I think Curry would be more fun just because he has that same shooting ability, and obviously Westbrook was just such a clash in style. But I don't know if I want to see this happen. Not that it's going to happen. I don't love the idea.
I think I agree with you sort of. Like I want to see Steph Curry handle the ball again and take on a bigger role, but he has injury concerns himself. He's 32. I think he would make more sense next to Harden than Chris Paul or Russell Westbrook did, because Chris Paul and Russell Westbrook are ball dominant. And if you have Harden doing his thing, ISO, maybe even some pick and roll, right, with Draymond, stuff like that, and you can have Curry run around with his off-ball movement. I mean, the gravity that Harden creates could create Curry can run off-ball. It would be interesting. I think it'd be a better fit than Harden's last two stops. But
I think that's just who Steph Curry is. Like, who is he not a good fit with, Yeah. Well, I think it says more about the limitations of Westbrook and Paul.
I think to some extent it's weird because the Warriors have just been all about Steph Curry and Klay Thompson and Draymond Green, right? And if you bring Harden in, Harden's a team hijacker, right? Wherever he goes, he kind of hijacks the offense. He hijacks the game plan. And maybe he wouldn't if he was on Golden State, and maybe Steve Kerr would drill into him. I mean, to some extent, Kevin Durant became a better team player, even though he wasn't nearly as selfish as Harden. If there's one team where maybe Harden would change his style of play to win, it would probably be Golden State.
It would just feel so wrong,
It would feel wrong. I agree.
Durant joining the Warriors, obviously rubbed a lot of people, myself included, the wrong way. But it's not like they were really rivals. Like, yeah, they had just played in the West Finals the year before. But I would say if the Warriors, or if Steph Curry has a true rival, maybe other than LeBron, it's probably Harden. And obviously it's been very one-sided, but it's almost been like, it's kind of been like a big brother, little brother, where it's like, all right, you're going to try your little one-on-one style to beat us. We're going to beat you because we're the superior team. Harden then joining that would just feel so wrong. Like that would be like on another level from Durant. I don't think people would get on Harden like they did Durant, but it would just, from like a stylistic perspective, it would be so strange.
It would be, but again, the Warriors title window is closing very fast at this point with Curry's age, and Thompson's gonna miss a second straight season. Draymond's older. We still haven't even seen if last year from Draymond was a fluke or if that's just who he is now. And so if your title window really is that narrow and you can get James Harden, right, as much as it's a high risk, high reward move, right? So I wouldn't be shocked if they did it based on that.
And I do think my final point on this is it's just so much more acceptable now to make a move like that compared to even 5, 10, and certainly 20 years ago. I think if Jordan's Bulls could have had an opportunity to get Isaiah Thomas, I think they wouldn't have even pursued it on principle, right? It just wouldn't. It would just be like, no, I'm not playing with that guy. Like the guy I've just been going up against for the last decade, no way. And I think now, the whole I'm on this team and this team is our rival, so I can't play for them. I don't really think that exists anymore.
No, not for the vast majority of the league.
So you mentioned Draymond Green. He's on my list of players I want to discuss. We updated our preseason projections today. We had an initial set go up a couple weeks ago, and now these are updated post free agency, post draft. A lot of the things we mentioned earlier today with certain guys missing time to begin the year, all that has been updated. And Draymond Green is on my list of players who, I don't really have a great name for this list. Of like guys, I don't know if we've ranked correctly. I don't know. Some of them we might be too high. Some we might be a little too low. Draymond's in such a unique position because he was kind of the lone healthy piece of the real Warriors last season, and given that he was basically surrounded by the Santa Cruz Warriors, we're not really sure if he's completely washed up or, could be rejuvenated, by having Steph Curry back, and certainly having Klay Thompson would have helped. My belief is that he has another like good couple years in him. Does that mean he's ever going to go back to shooting like 38% from three like he did at his peak? I think that part of his game is probably gone, but I still think he can be, if you're talking fantasy, I think we have him ranked like in the mid 60s. I think that's fairly realistic.
I think so. Yeah.
Oh, excuse me. We have him at 49 right now.
Well, I mean, his stats usually translate very well to fantasy because of the steals and blocks, right? And I think I'm worried about his shooting, especially next to James Wiseman. But I think because they have Wiseman now, that Kerr will probably encourage Draymond to shoot more threes just for better spacing. So I think it's going to kind of be like I think he's just going to shoot a ton, and we'll see if it pans out or not. I'm not sure I'd bank on that.
I hope that's not the route they take, but I mean, I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah. I think you could have a bounce back. I mean, I was really hopeful for him last year. I mean, last year was such like an anomaly for so many reasons for the Warriors. And I can't blame Draymond Green if he was out there playing at like 75%, like effort almost every single game. He shot 39% from the field last year. That can't continue. That's awful. So I think him bouncing back to somewhere around the 50 range makes sense. I would probably draft him around that range. I think that's a fine median place to draft him, I guess.
All right. What about Michael Porter Jr., who we have at 61? And I feel like the ranking to me is a little bit high, but then when you look at the projected numbers, we have him at about 17 points, 9 rebounds, 1.5 assists, and about 1.7 steals and blocks. Like that to me seems realistic, but that putting him at 61 to me seems a little high. How do you feel about that?
Well, they need him because losing Jeremy Grant and Mason Plumlee was a huge hit to their front line. So Millsap is going to have to play a ton of backup center, I think, unless Bol pans out or their rookie, whose name I'm forgetting, pans out. So Porter's going to play. I think what could end up driving down his fantasy rank would just be his games played, right? We have him at 66 games out of 72 played. His injury history is obviously one of the reason he slipped was because teams got a hold of his medicals and were like, I'm not drafting that guy, even with all of his upside. So I think if you're drafting him, if I was drafting him, I would be like elated with 66 games. Personally, I would draft him assuming he misses like 15, maybe 20. So I think that's kind of the difference, and it's hard to show that in the ranks all the time because of the wild variance.
Right. Yeah, and I should say, like when we go through these, we're generally pretty favorable. Even though in my mind I think Blake Griffin's going to play like 33 games this year, we're not going to project a guy for 33 games. We factor it in to some degree. Like I think we have Kyrie at like 58 or 59. He could very well miss more than that, but if you project a guy to miss 25 games, I don't think that ultimately accomplishes the task of creating projections in the first place. I will say with Porter, if he misses time, it's going to be something really serious. It's like if he re-aggravates the back injury, right. I feel like he's either going to miss the whole year or not miss time at all. Because it's not like they've been competitive, I guess, with his fitness. He except for the playoffs, he would rarely play more than 25 minutes, but it's not like he was really being rested on back-to-backs. Like once he came back, he's pretty much been healthy and had the training wheels off.
Yeah, and I think projecting him for 17 and 9 makes sense. I mean, he played almost 1,000 minutes last year, which is a pretty good sample, and averaged 20 and 10 per 36, shot 50, 40, 83. I mean, he was awesome, And it's just, the defense is an issue, but they're going to need him out there this year. They lost too much talent on the front line.
Right. And ultimately, I think that's a good thing. I was surprised they brought back Paul Millsap. But I think they basically have no excuse but to throw him out there for 30 minutes a night anymore. And that's going to be a lot of fun to watch. Next on my list, kind of a similar situation, Christian Wood. I thought this was one of the better value signings, whether James Harden and Russell Westbrook are on the roster in a month or 3 months or not. I thought for the money that they threw at Christian Wood, this was a good deal for the Houston Rockets. We have Wood at 51, and we should say these are 8 category, fairly standard league rankings. 67 games, about 31 minutes a game, 19 points, 9 rebounds, 1.4 assists, 1.2 blocks. So I mean, pretty similar numbers ultimately to Michael Porter. I think there's maybe a little more defensive upside with Christian Wood, and I think maybe a little more rebounding upside. I mean, Porter's a very, very good rebounder, but Wood has slightly better size and a little bit more filled out physically.
Yeah, he's a more versatile player, right? Like better. Yeah, he's a better rebounder overall. Can play some defense. Not as good as a 3-point shooter. I mean, they play different positions essentially, because Wood's kind of a center / power forward. Porter's a wing. But yeah, I mean, Christian Wood, like you mentioned, great opportunity. New coach in Houston, but they're still going to play 5 out here. They're just abandoning kind of the pure small ball, bringing in Wood. But yeah, I mean, the thing is, the only other scorer on this team besides Harden and Westbrook is Eric Gordon, who has dealt with plenty of injury issues. He was injured like all of last year, basically. And he's the only guy that's really scoring more than 15 points a game consistently for the Rockets. And so you put Christian Wood in this situation, and I think he does have the upside to score 15 to 20 points a night. And an offense that he fits in perfectly with. He can run the floor. He can hit threes. He can work inside too. The Harden pick and roll can come back to some extent, right? We saw that basically go away when they went complete small ball with more of a traditional coach. You might see Wood kind of in that Capella role, catching a lot of lobs. So his field goal percentage should stay high too. Yeah,
exactly. I almost think he's better off if those guys stick around. Like, I think there's a case to be made that if they were to flip Harden for like young pieces, that Christian Wood, is maybe like all of a sudden the number 1 guy for Houston. But I think he could be like a super Capella in that role, and is going to be really good at it. Ja Morant, we have him at 47 in our rankings. Obviously an awesome rookie year. I think the key for him is, one, more 3-point volume. He wasn't a terrible 3-point shooter. I think there were some concerns coming in about how that would translate. But, I mean, 48% from the field overall as a rookie was fantastic. 33.5% from 3. Again, for a guy with question marks, I thought that was really good. But he only took 2.7 per game. I think, when he's at his peak, whether that's, 2-3 years or 4-5 years from now, you probably want him taking at least double that. I'm just wondering how willing he's going to be to increase that number right away.
Yeah, I mean, the Grizzlies are going to be without Jaren Jackson for a while too, right? And that's going to put even more pressure on Ja Morant to score the ball. They don't really have a ton of other options. Like, Dylan Brooks is going to shoot a lot, right? He's the only other guy. A lot. He's going to shoot the ball. Valanciunas, he'll take up some post possessions. He can hit threes. Obviously Brandon Clark is good, but like Ja Morant is really the only guy in this team that is going to create offense for himself as a guard or a wing and get other people involved. So, I mean, he's for a monster year. The question is, can he stay efficient, and is he going to hit threes? And his defensive stats weren't great last year either. 0.9 steals, less than half a block. So he has some concerns, but if you're talking about a guy whose shot attempts should be sky high, his assists are already good, I mean, he'll have a good year.
And he was kind of hesitant to, really take on some of those. Like, Jaren Jackson missed a lot of time last year, and they were kind of in the same boat that they're going to be starting this year. And it's not like Ja Morant was like, all right, I'm just going to take 30 shots. Like, he for as much of like a highlight player as he is, he's still like a pass first point guard. And I think they would almost be better off. I think you and I are in agreement that, especially with Jackson out to begin the year, Memphis could struggle. They could kind of take a step back and maybe not have a great chance to make the playoffs this year. If the trade-off there is Ja Morant, is almost forced to, control things a little bit more and take more shots and get more comfortable being the guy, I don't think that's necessarily the worst trade-off.
No, I mean, his development, I think, takes priority.
Oh yeah.
Right. I mean, he looks like he could be one of the best guards in the NBA sooner than later. So
Mhm.
you want him out there trying to work on his skills, hit his threes, get to the free throw line more. I just looked at his games where he took at least 20 shots. It's like 8 games. He only got to the free throw line 4.1 times per game in those games. So that's something too that he should probably work on because he's a great free throw shooter. He just needs to get there.
When he goes to the rim a ton. I mean, I don't. Maybe that's just something where you need to go into contact instead of trying to go over or around it.
Yeah, he's really skinny, so he bounces off people, and if people don't respect your 3-point shot, then they're gonna be in position. You're not gonna be able to catch someone out of position very easily. There's gonna be no help defense, stuff like that.
So this guy's not on my list, but I mean, is Brandon Clark like the most obvious sleeper? Is he even a sleeper at this point?
I would classify him as a sleeper because I don't think the average person, the average fantasy or the average NBA fan knows who Brandon Clark is. Mm-hmm. And so, if you're in a fantasy draft with a lot of other people who play fantasy basketball, they're going to know. But your casual NBA fan, I think they have no idea who Brandon Clark is. Mm-hmm. So I think he's a sleeper. I mean, 22 minutes a game, he averaged 12 and 6 last year. He's going to be in a great spot this year.
Excuse me. All right. So what about Zion Williamson? We have him down at 79. I feel like that number just seems really low based on his reputation. We've talked about this over and over. We're being pretty generous, I think, to Zion. We have him at almost 26 points a game, 8 rebounds, almost 3 assists. That's up quite a bit from last year. 1.5 steals and blocks. For one, the free throw percentage drags him down a ton. He was a terrible free throw shooter last year. We have him bumped up to about 67%, but for a guy who takes a ton, that's really damaging. And we also don't really think he's going to take a lot of threes. He took a bunch in his first game and then I think took only like 2 or 3 more the rest of the year and missed them all. Based on what we saw last time we saw Zion Williamson, he was out of shape. He still looked partially injured. He was shut down early. Like there's not like a ton of momentum. We haven't really even heard anything about him over these last few months. There's not like a lot of positive momentum for a guy who was, the lock of all locks this time last year.
One of the most hyped rookies in NBA history, and we've heard nothing from him during this offseason. It's a little weird. But yeah, 79 seems low. We have him missing 14 games, which I think is appropriate given his health, his injury history, the shortened season. But yeah, this was something we looked at the end of last year, and we're like, listen, like Zion's playing amazing. It's just not, his fantasy stats are not, it's not great. Like his free throw percentage, this is like Giannis too. Giannis finished like 14th in fantasy last year because his free throw percentage was terrible and he took like 10 a game. And this is going to happen to Zion as well because he didn't prove he was a good defender last year. In fact, when I watched him, he looked awful. He wasn't really a playmaker, which was something out of college people thought he could get maybe like 3 or 4 assists a game. I don't know about that, especially when you have Lonzo and Ingram on the team. And I don't think he's going to shoot threes. His form is one of the worst I've ever seen. It's a horrible shot form. He doesn't jump. His elbow's way out. It's flat. So I think 79 is fine. People are going to draft him way higher than that. I know it, no matter what the projections say. But I think this is around the range that he should be drafted.
Yeah, I'll be curious what, we don't have updated ADP data yet. I know we were previously displaying last year's, but we have that white for now. I think his ADP could be like 30 spots higher than that, if not more.
Yeah, I think people will take him in the 3rd round. Like I think that's where he'll go. But I think you're not getting a good return on your investment at all doing that.
No, not at all. All right, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Been in some very strange situations to begin his career. 2 very, very different situations, starting with the Clippers and then last year in OKC. He at least has the benefit of remaining with the same team, but entirely new coaching staff, basically an entirely new roster around him. I do think the Thunder are going to be a very bad team. I think they're okay with that. I also think he has the potential to be the best, like, good stats, bad team guy in the league. And weirdly, I think like the Thunder moving on from Kelly Oubre for virtually nothing, I think that helps SGA because I think Oubre had a chance to take a lot of shots. And I don't think SGA, we talked about Morant. They're similar in that way where they're not guys that want to go out and take 30 shots even if they have to. But he's not going to have much of a choice. A lot of the young players that OKC has in place are, project type of players. When you talk about someone like Pokusevski, or they're like these defensive minded, developing wings, Darius Baisley and, Lou Dort, guys like that. Like, there's not really like an Anthony Simons type on this roster who is just going to go out there and be happy to gun and try to develop. Like, a lot of these guys they're young, but they don't profile as anything more than role players long term. So, if there's one guy who's going to have no choice but to put up great numbers on a really bad team, I think it's him. And I guess I'm worried that it's like a little too obvious.
Yeah, he's not even I don't think you can qualify him as a sleeper. I think he's going to just go very high in drafts, early second round, even maybe some people get aggressive, draft him in the late first round. Mm-hmm. I tried to look and see like what his numbers were last season when he was like the only guy on the court. We have our on-off court stats at RotoWire. I took Chris Paul, Gallo, Dennis Schroeder off the court, and SGA only played 36 total minutes without those guys last year. And he put up, 24 points, 10 rebounds, 9 assists per 36 in those 36, right? But I don't think he'll average a triple-double because that's what those numbers indicate. But, like, he's going to play point guard for them. And that's something that last year he only averaged 3 assists a game. And I think the biggest bump for him will probably be assists. Not that he has a ton of people to pass to that are going to be shot makers, but his upside is as high as any young players in the league in terms of like a second to third year jump or third to fourth or whatever it may be.
And it's the NBA. No matter what, like, they're going to score around 100 points every game. They're going to grab 40 rebounds. They're going to have 15 to 25 assists. Like I said, they're not going to be a good team, but even the worst teams that we've ever seen, it's not like they average 30 points less than everybody else. Like, the numbers are going to be there. It's just going to be, kind of unfamiliar names getting them. I'm going to go off list again here since we're on this team. What are your thoughts on Al Horford?
Oh God. I would be scared.
To put this on you.
I would be scared to draft him. I'll put it that way. I would not want him on my team unless I got him at what I thought would be like an insane discount. I'd be worried about him getting injured. I'd be worried about him just sitting every back-to-back for basically no other reason than just like tanking. I think when he plays, he has potential to put up big numbers. If they play him like 30 to 35 minutes, which I'm not sure that will happen again. Mm-hmm. I think we have him ranked at 87th. I think that's perfectly fine. We have him 61 games, 28 minutes a game. If you get him in the 8th round, that's fine, right? But I would not want him on my teams, I don't think.
The thing with Horford is I don't feel like watching him last year, it was like, all right, now, he might not be on a good team, but now he can go get to work. It was like he might just be washed up. I don't know that playing more minutes and having much worse teammates around him is all of a sudden going to help him. I thought Philly on paper was such a good spot for him because he could play less minutes. He could be out there and just kind of do what he does best at this point, which is step out and space the floor and also protect the rim. And I just, with this Thunder team, he's such a misfit, based on how old the rest of this roster is.
Yeah, same with George Hill, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if the thing is, if Horford went to a kind of like a borderline 8th seed team, you could see them, using him in a way that would, up his usage a lot. They like need him. Like if he went to Charlotte or if he went to Orlando or something, I could see him playing better. But the fact that he's stuck with OKC on a team that is in one of the deepest rebuilds we've ever seen, that does not bode well for him, I don't think.
Mm-hmm. All right, I got 2 more guys. John Collins in Atlanta. Our esteemed colleague Ken Kreitz has been on our case about where we have John Collins projected, and we did amend that with this newest update. But he still ranks pretty high, and I thought we were being pretty aggressive initially, and we kind of backed off that a little bit with their moves in free agency. But he's still 16th overall, based largely on the fact that he is one of the rare players that blocks more than a shot and a half per game, and also can get you a 3-pointer and a half per game, super efficient from the field. He's just a really good player, and I think being on the Hawks has kind of dampened his reputation nationally. So I think with Collins, it's not really a question of his own ability. It's just when a team goes out in free agency and basically adds an entirely new team of veterans to add to the current team without making many subtractions, it's like, how much do we really factor that in? For a player who's clearly ascending, how many minutes does he lose to guys like Gallinari and Capella? And maybe the bigger question is like, how many shots does he lose to those guys?
Right. I'm really interested to see what the sort of market correction is on him. It sounds like he's still going to start over Gallinari. I also think Collins will play backup center as well. So I think he'll still find himself into like 32 to 35 minutes a game. But Collins, every year he's been in the league, all 3 seasons, he's been top 20 in true shooting percentage. Last year he was 6th in true shooting percentage. You don't just suddenly give that guy 26 minutes a game. He's 23 years old, one of the most promising big guys in the league, even though he's kind of been like under the radar because Atlanta's been so bad. But I think he could still be a top 15 fantasy player. Like he could still get 20 points, 8 rebounds. He can hit more threes. He hit 40% of his threes last year. I can see the rebounding dipping because of Capella. But I don't know. He's still going to be really good. They're still going to have to feature him, even if it's to trade him. You got to play him 30 minutes a game.
Yeah, I don't really understand the trade talk around Collins. Like, I guess it's just purely money related, but I mean, what are the weaknesses? I guess, he's not a great defender, but your point guard's also not a great defender. Maybe that's the issue, but like, I feel like plenty of players with much bigger holes than him have been handed max contracts without any hesitation.
Yeah, I mean, almost no team in the league would see a guy averaging 22 and 10 at 22 years old with a top 6 true shooting percentage and be like, you know what? He's not a good defender, though. We can't pay this guy. If he wants a max, I can understand them not wanting to give him the max, but that's a tough trade to make if you're doing it. Like, that's a really tough situation to be in. I wouldn't want to trade him. He's too good. He's too young.
I agree. I just don't. I mean, it's not apples to apples, but like Gordon Hayward, who's been terrible for 2.5 years, and it might never be the same because of an ankle injury, just got a second max at age 31. Like, what are we talking about here? And then what team in the league would rather have Gordon Hayward than John Collins right now? I don't know. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And I feel like a lot of the moves that they made this offseason are to prepare them to maybe be without Collins.
Yeah. I don't know.
Weird.
I think I have no idea, but I'm still high on him.
Yeah, same here. On that note, Kevin Durant, our final player on the list. We have him at number 8 in our rankings. I think that's just about right. I am reading every little tidbit about Kevin Durant playing well in scrimmages that I can find. I think he's going to have a huge year. I don't think he's going to be overly affected by the Achilles. My big concern is just how much time does he miss. I don't think he's necessarily going to get re-injured. I just think they're rightfully going to be cautious, and maybe not even because of load management. I think it's just more, they're, like we talked about at the top, they're going to be one of those teams that nothing matters. They could be the 2 seed, they could be the 4 seed, they could be the 7 seed. As long as they're in the playoffs and healthy, I think that's all the Nets care about. And I think Durant has probably reached that, LeBron point in his career where LeBron just stopped caring about the regular season and realized that it's all about titles and going balls to the walls, and getting the 2 seed and finishing 3rd in MVP voting doesn't really mean that much. So that's my worry with KD, is that, the Achilles is fine, but maybe he only plays like 57 games.
Yeah, I think I think you're high. I think you're more optimistic on Durant than me, because I would not draft him higher than 8th. I'll put it that way. I don't think I would do that. And I'm still worried about how like guys, Klay Thompson was looking great, right? And then he tore his Achilles. So you can, people can say Durant, I feel great. These guys can feel great. It's like, they're not going to say anything else, unless it's like they can't play. If they're not going to be ready for opening night, that's what you're going to hear. But if they're going to be ready for opening night, you're going to hear, I feel amazing. I feel as good as I've ever felt. So I'm just worried that he's going to come out and he'll still be good, right? But it might not be 50% from the field. It might be 46. It might not be 40% from 3. It might be 36 or whatever. He might only play 60 games, 55 games. Maybe I'm too much of a pessimist, but I'm not sure I would draft him in the first round still. I think there's just other options that feel a lot safer to me. I know his upside's crazy. He's Kevin Durant.
Mm-hmm. No, fair enough. And I think this also speaks to how many great options there are at the top. I think in a lot of years, given the circumstances, like Kevin Durant might go 4th or 5th, but there are just so many other options who are close enough and much safer that I don't think you're wrong in that opinion. I want to look at Defensive Player of the Year odds, which came out this week on the DraftKings Sportsbook. it feels like it's the same names every year for this award. It's Gobert, Davis, and Giannis, and then the field of like Adebayo, Embiid, Simmons. Horford used to be a part of that list. Kawhi. But it's kind of just been like a three-man race between Gobert, Davis, and Giannis the last 2 or 3 years. Obviously, Giannis won it last year. Gobert won it the couple years previous. Does that mean that it's now Davis's turn?
He could win it. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility for him to win it. I think we did a write-up last season of guys who are just some future bets, and I think I had Anthony Davis as someone who I picked that I thought had good odds. I don't think plus 275 is like great value for him to win Defensive Player of the Year. So I'm not sure I would bet it, but he could easily win it. He racks up plenty of steal and block numbers. I think Adebayo might be the last person on this list that I'd bet on at 10-1. Embiid's always interesting. Games played is an issue. Ben Simmons at 25-1, I think is solid value. But the 76ers are probably have to, like really improve as a team. Mm-hmm. And Kawhi, again, I'm worried about missed time. Everyone else on this list, I'm not so sure.
Draymond at 50-1 is interesting. I think I would have liked that better if Klay was healthy, just because you'd have like the full Warriors, and I think the narrative would kind of be there for Draymond. Like if he came back and even had like a pretty good season, and the Warriors were like the 2 seed in the West, I feel like there'd be a lot of momentum. The Draymond is back narrative would be out in full force, but I don't really feel that way now. I don't think it's really worth betting on any guards at all. And I don't know if we really consider Simmons a guard. I think he's big enough and unique enough that he could win it, but like no guard ever wins this award, and it's pretty rare for a wing even to win it at this point.
Yeah, Simmons is probably the only quote unquote guard I would bet on to win. I think Marcus Smart has potential, but again, if the Celtics are, if they lose 4 wins, or prorated to like the 72 game season or whatever, it's going to be tough if they aren't better or just as good as they were last year. And if he plays 35 minutes, he'll put up a ton of defensive stats. Right. It's just the team success.
Well, the biggest thing is either averaging a ton of blocks or a ton of steals. And every year you have somebody average like 3 blocks a game, but nobody gets to 3 steals. So you would need like Matisse Thybulle, who's 80-1. If he averaged like 3.5 steals a game, I think maybe that would do it. The problem is he's not going to get there. And like if a team defense is really good, it's the big man who always gets credit, right? It's never like the ace defensive shooting guard who gets all the credit. So like, it's just so hard for a guard. You can't have like an explosive defensive season as a shooting guard. Right.
Last season, Ben Simmons led the league steals per game at 2.1. Chris Dunn was the only other player in the league who averaged over 2 steals a game that qualified.
Real KD.
Yeah, exactly. And Simmons also averaged half a block. But again, that's not all that's indicative, because Andre Drummond averaged 1.9 steals and 1.6 blocks last year. So
yeah, the voters are getting a little smarter. Drummond would be like a 6-time defensive player of the year if this was like the 80s.
Yeah.
I'm trying to see if Chris Dunn is even on this list. If he's not, that's a huge oversight. I don't know if there's a field option either.
I'm trying.
I'm not seeing. Yeah, I don't think he is.
No, I control F. He's not on there.
Unfreaking believable. Okay, let's look at MVP real quick. We got about a minute left. So I just want to hear from you. Who right now? You can consider the odds if you want, or just make a pick. Who does your gut tell you is going to win the MVP in 2021?
I like Doncic at plus 450. It's the same odds as Giannis. Porzingis is going to be out for the beginning of the year, so Doncic is probably going to put up huge numbers. And if they can make the playoffs, especially with Porzingis missing time, I think he'll have a monster year, obviously.
I'm with you. It feels like Giannis would really have to outdo himself again. And I think the bigger factor working against him is like, I wouldn't say people have turned on Giannis, and that's not the case at all. But I think after this past flameout, he no longer gets the benefit of the doubt. I think he could have another monster regular season, and I don't think it would compel people the same way that these last 2 have. So he has to like really top what he's done the last couple of years, and that's possible if he plays more minutes. But yeah, I love Doncic. It's hard to really go away from that. I don't really see it happening for Curry. I don't think LeBron's going to try or play enough games. I like Durant at 15-1, as I've said a couple of times. I think there's a narrative there. If he plays enough games and if the Nets win enough games, that he would win like a dual MVP comeback player of the year type of thing. But yeah, Durant and Doncic, I think, are the ways I would lean if I were a betting man.
Yeah, for longer shots, I like Lillard and Tatum at 20-1.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just hard. Like with the MVP, it's never a guy who's like 100-1 to begin the year. It's almost always one of the 3 or 4 favorites, and that's typically how it goes. All right, we're out of time. Alex will be back either later this week or early next week to keep previewing the NBA season. 3 weeks away.